Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, without a shadow of a doubt, is the most dishonest, disingenuous politician of her generation. And she is a very open anti-Black racist as well. And when it comes to her anti-Black racism, it is crazy to me how nobody sees it. First off, this woman is a master shapeshifter who is whoever she needs to be when she needs to be it. During the last presidential race, Elizabeth Warren came under fire over old documents which resurfaced in which she classified herself as Native American. And when AOC was asked about it, this is what she had to say.
That takes me to Elizabeth Warren. This has been, it feels as if she's always explaining a little bit more.
Yeah.
She's never lied about anything, but there's been some, she doesn't seem to have given us the fullest answer yet. And there is a lot of people offended by cultural appropriation. Where are you on this, and what do you think she should do that she hasn't?
Well, I think there's two ways to talk about it. So one is, and again, we can use and still have an opportunity. I think here in this situation, I think there's still an opportunity to model what the correct way of navigating these waters look like. And so, for example, I'm Latina. And Latino Americans have a really interesting identity because, especially for me as a Puerto Rican woman, my identity is the descendant of many different identities. I am the descendant of African slaves. I am a descendant of indigenous peoples. I'm a descendant of Spanish colonizers. I am a descendant of all sorts of folks. That doesn't mean I'm Black. That doesn't mean I'm, Native. But it does mean that I can use that as I can tell the story of my ancestors. That doesn't mean that I am that.
So she's a descendant of slaves, she's indigenous, she's a Spaniard, and she's Jewish. Ocasio-Cortez reveals Jewish heritage in Hanukkah event, "My family was Sephardic." Incoming Democratic Congresswoman says it's the first time she shared her Jewish heritage in public. "Our dissentees are tied beyond our understanding." Also, I want to send a big shout out to all of my Moorish brothers out there rocking the fezzes, because I bet you didn't know AOC was one of your Moorish sisters. Oh yes. Before everyone jumps on me, yes, culture isn't DNA, but to be Puerto Rican is to be a descendant of African Moors plus slaves. Look at how she put African Moors plus slaves. AOC is making it very clear that she's not just a descendant of slaves, but she's an African Moor plus a descendant of slaves. Mark my words and watch. In the next House meeting, AOC is going to pull up to Congress in a fez. You just wait and see. But all jokes aside, AOC is literally whoever she needs to be depending on who she's talking to. She is everything to everybody except a reparationist, because when it comes to getting behind reparations for the descendants of American slavery, now all of a sudden she doesn't know what Black is anymore.
So the political conundrum is that if we live in a country that's still 70% white, which is a number that I think shocks a lot of people, but if you include white Hispanics, it actually is that big, who often vote similarly to non-Hispanic whites. What is a political cost, let's say, of saying we're going to throw your hat in with a program like reparations? How much do you think those considerations should be made?
Well, it's a good question. I think that one of the things that we've seen from early polling actually is that I think that we should distance ourselves and start getting away from this idea that we should only care about ourselves. Because when we really do start to assert and believe and understand and see how our destinies are tied, we kind of get away from this idea that only people of color care about other people of color and only white people care about other white people and so on. There are a lot of systems that we have to dismantle, but also it does get into this interesting area of where we are as a country about identity, because what does it mean to be Black? Who is who is Black and who isn't, especially as our country becomes more biracial and multiracial. Same thing with being Latino. Same thing. It brings up all these questions of like passing and things like that. But I do think it is important that we have to have substantive conversations about race beyond like what is racist and what is not. And if someone says something racist, does that make them racist? Like we need to get away from talking. Well, not that we have to get away from talking about racism. It's important that we talk about racism, but because we talk about racism so much, we actually aren't talking about race itself.
So when it's time to talk about reparations for the descendants of American slavery, now all of a sudden, she doesn't know what Black is anymore. But funny enough, she does support reparations for you as long as she can tie Hispanics into your reparations claim. Don't believe me? Well, here's a clip from a video that I made back in 2020 titled Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez Attempts to Leverage C-19 to Hijack Reparations. Now, with all that being said, let's fast forward to the current date, to which Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has made a very bold attempt to hijack the reparations conversation in order to include Brown in the conversation so that they can receive reparations for a tragedy that they did not go through. Now, this is what AOC had to say, according to the New York Post, that took these quotes off of her Twitter feed. COVID deaths are disproportionately spiking in Black and brown communities, Ocasio-Cortez tweeted to her 6 million followers on Friday morning. Why? Because the chronic toll of redlining, environmental racism, wealth gap, etc. are underlying health conditions, the Bronx-born lawmaker added. Inequality is a comorbidity. COVID relief should be drafted with a lens of reparations, she wrote. Oh, now you know what reparations is, huh? You see, when reparations is a talking point that only benefits the descendants of American slaves, she doesn't know what Black is anymore. She doesn't know what that means. But when she can find a way to crowbar her people into the mix so that they can receive reparations, now she's all for it. AOC has displayed a consistent pattern of behavior when it comes to Black Americans. Any political conversation that revolves around solely or largely benefiting Black Americans, she opposes it, unless she can find a way to crowbar Hispanics into it. Look at how she found a way to crowbar Hispanics into the protests surrounding George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, and Breonna Taylor.
And now that you talk about race, what do you think the Latinx community should do to stop racism among them and among other races?
Yeah, well, the first thing that's so important is for us to talk about racism within our community and how we are both impacted by racism in the United States and across the world, but also how it exists within our own communities. And, a lot of times I'll hear people say, okay, this is about Black Lives Matter. What about Latinos? And I always say Latinos are Black. we are Afro-Latina, and we run an entire racial spectrum. And so we have to have conversations around colorism, and we have to have conversations about the African and indigenous roots from which we come and how that's reflected in systems of power, wealth inequality, and frankly, our political system.
So now we're all Black. Everybody's Black all of a sudden when it's politically convenient to be. And to all of the AOC supporters who may watch this video and want to say, oh, no, she's just talking about Afro-Latinos. No, excuse denied. She said she doesn't know what Black is. So keep that same energy and keep not knowing what Black is. You can't sit up there and say you don't know what Black is until it politically benefits you, and then now all of a sudden we're all Black. It doesn't work like that, unless you're AOC, that is. Then I guess it does work for you. Now, I could sit up here and continue to give you example after example of her anti-Blackness and just her sheer fakeness overall. But let's get into the real reason that you're watching this video. Now, recently, I spoke on how Congress put a hold on non-citizen voting in DC. And during that hearing, I want to play for you what AOC had to say.
Thank you.
Gentlewoman from New York is recognized for 4 minutes.
I thank the ranking member and my colleague from Maryland. It is rich, so rich to hear the other side discuss the sacred right of voting, discuss what our veterans and our service members fought for in the sacred right of voting, while defending and continuing to defend the disenfranchisement of American citizens in D.C. for their right to vote. They don't believe in statehood. They don't believe in the actual enfranchisement and voting rights for D.C. residents who are U.S. citizens, and yet they have the audacity and the gall to not just continue in that position and claim they believe in the sacred right to vote while denying that right to vote for an overwhelmingly black city.
Here we go. Now all of a sudden she knows what black is when it benefits her people. My apologies for interrupting. I just had to point that out.
But then expanding their position so that in direct contradiction of their quote-unquote conservative values of small government and defending freedom, have decided to expand the jurisdiction of this body to meddle into the business of D.C. residents. The D.C. City Council has the right to determine its policies for D.C. residents. And if any member of this body does not like that, they can feel free to change their registration, resign their post, and run for D.C. City Council. And for those who are residents here of Washington, D.C., they could have, as the ranking member stated, gone to any one of the many hearings on this issue. I understand that there may be disagreement. I understand that that Republicans may not be happy with what the D.C. City Council is doing. But when cities in Vermont passed the same provisions, when San Francisco, when 9 Maryland cities brought up this provision, did the Republican Party corral all of Congress and bring this issue down to the floor for a vote? No, they did not. They are singling out the residents of the District of Columbia and expanding in the history of disenfranchisement that goes all the way back to the legacy of slavery. And they're bringing it right here to this floor because why? They don't have any real bills to debate. We're not here to talk about health care. We're not here to talk about abortion. We're not here to talk about voting rights. We're here to talk about the expansion and the continued subjugation and disenfranchisement of the people of the District of Columbia. Let them govern themselves. And with that, I yield back to the ranking member.
Once again, now all of a sudden, she knows what black is. But not only does she understand what black is, she can now eloquently articulate how this is, and I quote, expanding in the history of disenfranchisement that goes all the way back to the legacy of slavery. This is merely a deceitful way of tying in Hispanic issues into the legacy of slavery and Jim Crow. That is all this is. And she's proven that to you time and time again. Because when it comes to standalone black issues, that's when she develops amnesia and doesn't know what black is anymore. But if she can find a way to make it benefit her people, then now all of a sudden, she becomes the foremost authority on how certain politics are, quote, expanding in the history of disenfranchisement that goes all the way back to the legacy of slavery. Now, unfortunately, there are a lot of black progressives who support AOC, but I don't believe many of them understand or know her anti-black history. So if you have any friends or relatives that fall on the lines of being progressive, I'm not arguing that they need to stop being a progressive. My argument is that they need to withdraw their support from AOC. It starts there. And with all that being said, that does it for today's video. So please make sure you hit the subscribe button as well as the bell notification next to the subscribe button so you can be notified whenever I release a new video. All social media links will be pinned in the comment section below. I also have a Telegram group now, so if you have Telegram, make sure to hit the link in the description box below as well as pinned in the comment section to join my Telegram group. And also, please make sure you text tdhiphop to number 33222. That's tdhiphop to number 33222. That way you'll get a text notification whenever I release a new video, but it also serves as an insurance plan for myself, so in case YouTube ever gives me the axe, I'll be able to send you a direct link to where you can find me next. And last but certainly not least, for those of you who have a love and appreciation for the work that I put in on this channel, the number one way you can show your support is through Patreon. For only $3 a month, that will help put me in position to take TD Hip Hop Media off of YouTube. Remember, the goal is not to grow big on YouTube, but to grow independent of YouTube. And for those of you who have issues with joining Patreon, you can also hit hit the join button that's next to the subscribe button, and that way you can become an official channel member for as little as $3 a month as well. And lastly, if you haven't already, please make sure you join the emailing list. There is no way that I can go independent of YouTube if I cannot take the audience with me. And the link to that will be pinned in the comment section as well. Thank you for your time, and until the next video, peace.